Welcome back to the deep dive. Usually when we sit down at these microphones, we're trying to wrap our arms around a massive, singular topic.
Right.
We'll spend digging into the history of the internet or the science of sleep or something like the collapse of the Bronze Age. We take this mountain of articles and books and, try to boil it all down.
Exactly. Usually we're drilling down into one specific subject just to see how it all works.
But today we're doing something a little bit different. We aren't looking at a single subject. We're looking at a single square on the calendar.
Yeah.
We're doing a deep dive into a date.
It's a fascinating experiment in historical connectivity. I mean, usually we think of history as this long, straight line, a timeline moving left to right.
Sure.
But sometimes if you stop and just look at one specific date across different years, you start to see these incredible patterns emerge. It's like taking a core sample of history.
A core sample, I like that.
You drill down vertically and you see all these different layers of sediment that somehow tell a unified story.
Exactly. And the date in question is February 10th. Now, if you look at your calendar right now, February 10th might just seem like a random Tuesday or Thursday. But we've got a stack of notes here from a source called the Sankofa Chronicle, specifically their breakdown of February 10th milestones in the African diaspora. And let me tell you, this list, it is wild.
It really is. The scope here is just immense. We're talking about events spanning from 1927 all the way up to 2014.
Right.
And geographically, we are just bouncing all over the place, from the deep American South Mississippi up to Pittsburgh, then across the Atlantic to South Africa, over to Liberia, and finally landing in Nigeria.
It sounds like a random grab bag at first glance. I mean, you've got opera singers, you've got reggae legends, presidents, protests. But the Sankofa Chronicle frames it all under this one specific theme: remembrance and resilience.
And that's really the mission for this deep dive. We want to see if we can connect these six very disparate dots. How does an opera star in 1927 connect to a protest in Nigeria in 2014? The source argues that these stories weave the tapestry of our collective journey.
A tapestry.
And I think by the end of this, you're going to see February 10th as a sort of masterclass in how power is claimed, how it's used, and, how it's challenged.
I love that. Okay, so let's start pulling at the threads. Let's unpack this first layer. We're going back to the earliest date on the list, February 10th, 1927.
We're in Laurel, Mississippi. And on this day, Leontyne Price is born.
Now, for those who might not be opera the name Leontyne Price might sound familiar, or maybe you've heard of it, but the source calls her a future operatic legend. And knowing where she started, Mississippi, 1927, that titled Legend, it feels like it carries a lot of weight.
It absolutely does. And here's where it gets fascinating. The source explicitly mentions that she shattered racial barriers at the Metropolitan Opera. You have to just pause and consider the context. A black woman, born in the segregated South in the late 20s. This is the era of Jim Crow at its absolute peak. And she rises to become a prima donna at the Metropolitan Opera in New York.
And we should be clear about what the Met represents. It's not just, a music thing.
No, absolutely. The Metropolitan Opera is, in many ways, it's the fortress of high European culture. In the mid-20th century, it was exclusive, it was white, and it was incredibly rigid. It was the definition of an institution that was built for someone like Leontyne Price.
That's the definition of resilience right there. It's not just that she sang well, it's that she broke into a room
that was explicitly locked.
Yeah.
Precisely. It's about occupying space. The Met isn't just a venue. It represents a pinnacle of high art and Western culture. So for a black woman from Mississippi to not just enter that space, but to dominate it.
To be the main draw.
To be the one selling out tickets. That completely changes the narrative of who belongs where.
It reminds me of that old saying, you have to be twice as good to get half as far.
Well, in her case, she was twice as good, and she went all the way to the top. She proved that the African diaspora wasn't just limited to folk traditions or the blues, though those are incredibly vital art forms, but that a black woman could master and dominate the most complex European classical structures. She beat the gatekeepers at their own game.
Okay, so February 10th, 1927, we have the birth of Leontyne Price, who breaks barriers by mastering the institution. Now, I want to jump forward in time, but stay on the theme of music, because the next entry is it's jarringly February 10th, 1981.
A very different vibe here. We move from the velvet seats of the opera house to the concert stage. This is the date of Bob Marley's final concert.
His final concert, like the last one ever.
The very last one. It took place in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Tragically, he was already sick with cancer at this point, though the public didn't really grasp the severity. The tour was canceled shortly after this show.
The source identifies him as a reggae icon, which, okay, we all know, but it specifically notes that his Pan-African message still resonates.
And that's the key connection. Think about the contrast with Leontyne Price. Price entered a European framework opera, and she excelled within it. Bob Marley didn't enter a framework. He built a new one.
Right.
He took reggae, which is a localized Jamaican sound, and turned it into a global vehicle for political resistance and spiritual unity.
That's wild to think about. February 10th, you have the birth of an opera legend in 27 and the final curtain call of a reggae legend in 81. And they just couldn't be more different stylistically. Price is classical, disciplined, institutional.
And Marley is grassroots, rhythmic, political. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, look at what they have in common. They both use their voices, literally their vocal cords, to articulate the experience of the African diaspora. Price did it by proving excellence within an existing system. Marley did it by creating a new system entirely, a Pan-African sound that spoke to people across the globe, from Kingston to Pittsburgh to London.
So on this one date, you have the alpha and the omega of Black musical influence, the birth of the voice that stormed the Met, and the final performance of the voice that united the diaspora.
And both, in their own way, were architects of culture. They were building the visibility of their people. But while they were shaping culture, there were these massive political shifts happening on this date as well.
Right. And that brings us to our second segment. We're moving from the stage to the systems of power. And this is where the resilience part of our theme really gets tested. We need to talk about 1964.
1964 is a heavy, heavy year in American history. And on February 10th, 1964, a massive domino fell. The source notes that on this day, the U.S. House of Representatives passed the Civil Rights Act.
Okay, let's just pause here and unpack the specifics. We all learn about the Civil Rights Act in school, but sometimes it just becomes a vocabulary word. The source says this act was for dismantling Jim Crow segregation and expanding protections for Black Americans.
Dismantling is the key word there. We have to understand that Jim Crow wasn't just, a few bad rules or some people with prejudiced attitude. It was a comprehensive legal, economic, and social architecture designed to enforce a racial hierarchy. It was a caste system.
So you couldn't just wish it away with good vibes.
Exactly. You had to take a legislative sledgehammer to the support beams of that architecture. Passing this act in the House on February 10th was that sledgehammer. It was the federal government finally saying the way the South is running itself is illegal.
And it happened on February 10th. That's a good day for freedom.
It is. It was the momentum shifter. It signaled that the federal government was finally moving to enforce the promises made a century earlier during the Civil War. But the struggle for freedom isn't local, it's global. And this is where the Sankofa Chronicle draws this incredible parallel.
Oh, yeah.
If you fast forward from 1964 in the U.S. to 1990 in South Africa.
I see where you're going. February 10th, 1990.
The announcement is made. Nelson Mandela is to be released from prison.
After 27 years, I can't even wrap my head around that number. 27 years. That is an entire lifetime for many people. And the source says this moment marked the beginning of apartheid's end.
It's almost poetic, isn't it? On February 10th, 1964, the U.S. House moves to legally end segregation. Decades later, on the exact same day, the South African government makes the announcement that signals the end of their system of segregation.
It's like the universe is rhyming with itself.
It really highlights the interconnectedness of these freedom struggles. The source groups these together because they're both about dismantling oppression. In the U.S., it was a legislative victory in the House bureaucratic, sure, but essential. In South Africa, it was the symbolic victory of a man preparing to walk free.
But both events changed the fabric of daily life for millions of people. It wasn't just abstract politics. It was about where you could sit, where you could live, who you could be.
Exactly. And it raises an important question about how change happens. Sometimes it's a law being passed in a quiet room in Washington, D.C. Sometimes it's a man walking out of a prison gate with the whole world watching. But the result is the same. The needle moves toward justice.
There is a difference in the type of victory, though, right? The Civil Rights Act was a document. Mandela was a human being.
That's a great observation. The 1964 event was structural. The 1990 event was visceral. I mean, seeing Mandela walk free, that image went around the world. It proved that the regime had blinked. You don't release the leader of the opposition unless you are admitting that the status quo is over. It was the death knell of the system.
So we've looked at the cultural architects Price and Marley. We've looked at the dismantlers of oppression, the Civil Rights Act and Mandela. But the list doesn't stop in the 20th century. You've got some modern milestones to cover, too.
You do. And these next two entries from 2006 and 2014, they really shift the focus. Because
Yeah.
once you win the freedom, once you break the barrier, well, you actually have to run the place. We're moving from fighting for rights to the messy reality of leadership and accountability.
Let's start with 2006, February 10th, 2006. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf.
A monumental figure. The source identifies her as Liberia's president. But more importantly, it notes she is Africa's first elected female head of state.
That is a massive distinction. First elected female head of state on the entire continent. And on this date, she wasn't just in Liberia, she was addressing the U.S. Congress.
Think about the visual of that. We just talked about the U.S. House passing the Civil Rights Act in 1964. 42 years later, on that same day, an African woman, a head of state, stands in that same chamber addressing the American government.
It's a full circle moment. It shows how far the conversation has shifted. I mean, she represents the pinnacle of political achievement. She's broken the ultimate glass ceiling in African politics.
She has. And she wasn't just a figurehead. Liberia had been decimated by civil war. She was known as the Iron Lady. She was tasked with rebuilding a broken country. Her presence in Congress was a signal that Africa was entering a new era of democratic legitimacy and leadership. It was a victory lap for the themes we've been discussing.
But the Sankofa Chronicle is honest. It doesn't just show the victories, it also shows the ongoing challenges. Because just a few years later, on February 10th, 2014, we see a very different scene in Nigeria.
Yeah, this one feels much closer to the ground. The source describes Nigerians protesting their government, specifically the response to Boko Haram.
Right. The context here is crucial. This was around the time of the Bring Back Our Girls movement, wasn't it?
Roughly that same time frame, yes.
Yes.
The region was being terrorized by Boko Haram, an extremist insurgent group, and the citizens felt abandoned. The source notes the citizens were demanding security and accountability.
It's such a stark contrast to Ellen Johnson Sirleaf addressing Congress. With Sirleaf, you have the celebration of leadership. With the Nigerian protests, you have citizens telling leadership, you need to do better.
And that is the reality of the diaspora experience, or really any civic experience. It's complex. You have these high moments of breaking barriers like Sirleaf, where we celebrate representation, but you also have the necessary gritty work of holding those in power accountable, like the protesters in Nigeria.
It feels different from the other protests we talked about. In the 60s, or with Mandela, the enemy was clear. It was institutionalized racism, the state against the people based on race. But here, in 2014, it's citizens protesting their own government.
That is the crucial evolution. This is what I mean about the deep dive into governance. Resilience isn't just fighting an external oppressor. Sometimes resilience is looking at your own leadership, people who look like you, people you might have voted for, and saying, you are failing us, you need to do better.
It kind of cuts the romanticism out of it. It's easy to cheer for Mandela walking out of prison. It's harder to look at a complex security crisis in Nigeria and say, this is also part of the legacy.
But it's necessary. If we only looked at Sirleaf in Congress, we'd have a lopsided view of the diaspora experience, one of pure assent. The Nigeria entry grounds us. It reminds us that freedom includes the freedom to be safe in your own home. And when the state fails that duty, the spirit of protest we saw in Marley or in the civil rights movement has to be reactivated.
It's the cycle of accountability. You fight for the seat at the table like Sirleaf, but once you're there, you have to answer to the people outside the building like in Nigeria.
Exactly. And that's what I find so compelling about this list. It balances the opera houses and Caribbean stages with the hard realities of freedom struggles and calls for security. It acknowledges that resilience isn't just about enduring, it's about speaking up, whether you're Bob Marley singing about it or a Nigerian citizen marching in the street for it.
So what does this all mean for us? We've gone from 1927 to 2014. We've traveled the globe. And it all happened on February 10th. What is the listener supposed to do with this pattern? Is it just trivia?
I don't think it's trivia. I think it's a framework. It
Yeah.
brings us back to the name of the source, Sankofa. Do you know what that means?
I've heard it, but remind me.
It's an Akan word from Ghana, and it translates roughly to go back and fetch it. The symbol is often a bird looking backward with an egg in its mouth. The whole philosophy is that there is no shame in returning to the past to retrieve what you've forgotten so you can move forward.
So we look back at February 10th, not to memorize dates for a history quiz, but to retrieve the lessons.
We retrieve the strategies. When we look at Leontyne Price, we retrieve the strategy of excellence. When we look at the Civil Rights Act, we retrieve the strategy of legislation. When we look at the Nigerian protests, we retrieve the strategy of dissent.
It's a toolkit.
It's a survival guide. The tapestry of our collective journey that the source mentions isn't just a pretty picture. It's a map of how marginalized groups survive and eventually thrive. They create art, they change laws, they take office, and they hold each other accountable.
It's just amazing how one 24-hour window on the calendar can hold all that history. It's like February 10th is a magnet for these pivotal moments.
It certainly seems that way. And here is a provocative thought to leave you with. If February 10th has been the backdrop for the end of apartheid, the dismantling of Jim Crow, and the rise of Africa's first female president, what is happening on February 10th today?
Oh, I like that. That's a heavy question.
We often think of history as something that happened to other people in the past, usually in black and white photos, but we are living in the history of tomorrow. If this date represents a legacy of accountability and freedom, what role are you playing in that continuing story right now?
Right. If you look at your calendar today, are you building culture? Are you dismantling a barrier? Are you holding power accountable?
Exactly. Are you the cultural architect, the dismantler of oppression, or the citizen demanding accountability? Mandela waited 27 years for his February 10th. Leontyne Price practiced for decades for hers. These moments are built, not given.
That puts a lot of pressure on my Tuesday, I have to say, but in a good way.
It does, but it's empowering. It means the calendar isn't just happening to you, you're active in it.
That is a powerful place to land. It's not just a date, it's an invitation.
Absolutely. And look, we touched on some massive topics here: apartheid, the Liberian Civil War, the inner workings of the Met. We barely scratched the surface.
We definitely did the Cliff's Notes version.
If you want the full context, and you should want it, the source material suggests visiting sankofapedia.org. There is a wealth of context there on the specific mechanics of these events.
Definitely check that out. It's always good to get the full story behind the headlines. Well, that's it for this deep dive into February 10th. Who knew one day could hold so much weight?
History is everywhere, even in the dates we overlook.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll catch you on the next dive.
Take care.